Okay, so basically healthcare professionals, they do, when patients come in theory, they should be doing like just a general kind of neurological exam, kind of to assess how that patient is doing. And the neurological exam, it's a very quick exam overall. And it actually has it's broken up to like 5 components. Okay. So, or 5 little subtests. And then those subtests are broken up to even smaller subtests. And so by doing these exams, you can kind of get an assessment of an individual and how they're doing overall, as well as, to try to pinpoint the areas that you could be having problems with. Okay. Mm-hmm. So let me tell you about the 5 components. Start off with that, or the 5 subsections. So we have the mental status exam. We have the cranial nerve. Exam, you have the sensory exam. You have the motor exam.
Change slide, because I still see the first one.
I haven't changed the slides. It's still the first one with the girl with her tongue out. Can you see me writing?
Yeah, it's just I thought you were gonna put another slide in. Okay.
I'll do that here in a second. I will. I promise. I'm just getting them out first. Okay, we have the coordination. Exam. And we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there is another one called the gait exam. That's typically associated with that coordination. So the gait is typically dealing with walking. So I'm going to add that one, and that's sometimes considered the 6th exam. The gait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Okay, so, oops. Okay, so we have the mental status exam. So that guy is going to be basically, it's going to test those higher cognitive functions, such as your memory, orientation, speech. Okay. So the cranial nerve exam, so those are just going to test your 12 cranial nerves. And so in that case, you're going to be looking at like your central and your peripheral structures, and then things that could be associated with certain things that are going to be feeding into those 12 cranial nerves. So coordination, that's going to be seeing if you can do perform complex movements. Spell perform.
So it's basically your movement.
Yep.
You could.
Yeah, if you could walk, you could flex, your coordination. And then sensory is going to be sensory. So you're testing your sensory, and your motor is going to be determining your motor skills. Okay. And then both your sensory and your motor skills are going to be associated with your spinal, the response of your spinal nerves. Okay. And then, of course, the gait is going to be part of this guy, and that's going to be walking. So the gait is going to be walking particularly. Okay. So this guy is going to be looking at your cerebellum. Okay, and mostly your cerebral cortex. Okay, so this area, I mean the cranial nerves, so it's the 12 cranial nerves that are going to be going from your diencephalon to your brainstem. And then also your olfactory nerve. I'm sorry, olfactory connection nerve. To your forebrain. Okay. We already talked about this, pretty much the spinal cord. And then all of the peripheral nerves that are connecting. And, and then for coordination, it's going to be the cerebellum. Okay. Questions, concerns, Cash? Okay, no questions? Okay. Okay, so causes of neurological defects or deficiencies. So one of the causes is stroke. Okay, so that's one of our leading causes. And you guys know what a stroke is a result of?
Not
Or-
that sure.
What was that?
Not that I'm really sure.
Okay.
I heard of it, but I'm not really sure what I have in mind probably might be.
So a stroke basically results from reduced blood flow. And so it's typically a reduced blood flow to a portion of the brain. And so there's two types of strokes that you could have. One of those could be a hemorrhagenic stroke. And so a hemogenic stroke, basically you have blood that'll start filling up a cavity, the cranial cavity, and then that blood that starts to fill up that cranial cavity. Okay, the blood that fills up that cranial cavity will actually start causing pressure on the tissue of the brain. And that pressure causes that damage that's associated with it. And then that will start to impair some of the functions that are associated with the nervous system, okay?
Is that the one that kind of leaves you like paralyzed from certain areas?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it does the most damage. Yeah. So actually it's right here. Okay. So that's one type of stroke. So the other type of stroke is called the type it out. The ischemic stroke. Now, the ischemic stroke is basically, that's a result of like clogs. So blood clots, fat deposits. And so when you have this happen, if it happens for a long time, you have a clog that happens for a long time, it'll basically start causing cell death. And then that can leads up to more and more damage, okay? So the hemorrhagic stroke, this guy does more damage. This guy does less damage. But what happens over time is that over time your vessel, your blood vessel walls will start to thicken, right? And then that thickness could sit there and end up with more and more clots, okay? So as we age, it thickens naturally, but also because of that clotting initially, it can also cause that wall to sit there and thicken. So after a while, what'll happen is that you may be able to sit there and pump it through, but that flow is severely screwed up, right? And so because of that, you're not able to get as much oxygen to your components that you should be, and that's going to end up causing more and more damage. That's going to end up causing more cell death, and then as a result of that, that's going to cause that permanent damage. So like anytime that you have oxygen deprivation, if it's lasting for more than 2 minutes, it's going to end up causing it's going to start causing deterioration, and it's going to end up resulting in those cells dying, more and more cell death, okay? Now, if it persists for hours and hours, then it's going to even be more drastic, okay? And so usually those clots are kind of resolved in a while, and so we'll end up with what we call transient. So transient attacks, and so there'll be clots that are temporary, and then eventually we get enough force behind them to kind of push them through, or they get resolved in some way. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
one causes more damage than the other one?
Yes. The hemorrhagic, anytime the word hemorrhagic basically means like rupture or blood. So a hemorrhagic stroke basically is when you're bleeding into your cranial cavity, and then that's causing pressure. So in that case, you're going to have a couple of things that are also going to happen. So eventually, it's going to start screwing up that blood-brain barrier, right? And when you start screwing that up, you're really screwed. Okay, so that one is more drastic than the isochematic, but the isochematic can also cause some of the same issues, but more just within the vessel itself. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes. There's some. I wanted to ask another question. These two strokes are they very common in when it comes to because I know heart stroke is very common when it comes to causing people to die. Are
Yes,
you
yes, yeah, and so that's why there's a tendency of because particularly a lot of our strokes are a result of clots, blood clotting, and or like I said, fat deposits. So those are your two common cases. So particularly in the US, because of our diet, we have a high fat content diet. We eat a lot of fast foods, things like that. That affects it. We're often very dehydrated, which also causes issues with clotting. So because we have such a poor diet and poor water intake, typically that leads to the probability of stroke.
okay.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. Okay, so let's see.
Yeah, because these two strokes that we're going over, I wasn't very familiar with them. I heard some other strokes like the heart stroke or some other ones, but these two didn't sound very common to hear.
Yeah, well, they are typically like what you're associating with your heart stroke. So that's your ischemic stroke. So because literally it's just clotting, right? So your heart stroke is as a result of clotting. So it's really, it falls under that category.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. So, and so I should say also because your blood vessels are, once you have that damage occurring to them, and our vessels, they're hard to repair. They're almost irreparable. So it's a consistent damage that is happening. So like I said, the wall thickens and stuff like that. And if we have the ischemic stroke, so the ischemic stroke could actually end up leading to a hemorrhagic stroke. Okay, so it could be so much damage as a result of that clot that it causes the pressure to build up and blood to flow into the cavity, the brain's cavity itself. Okay. Let's see.
So you're saying that one stroke could lead to another stroke?
Yes. Yeah. So you could end up with a minor stroke that ends up leading to a major stroke. Okay. Okay. So, so strokes are just one example of the causes of neurological defects or deficiencies, not defects. Another example can be just disorders, so neurological degenerative disorders or diseases. Let's see. Okay, so these are diseases kind of like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's, let's see, ALS, let's see, what is it? ALS is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Or, let's see, multiple sclerosis. So basically any type of disorder that's been associated with a neurological degeneration. Okay, so for instance, like multiple sclerosis, it basically affects the myelin. And what does myelin do? What is the purpose of myelin? Anybody remember? Yeah. What does myelin do? No one? Not even a guess?
It allows electrical impulsive.
Okay, so remember, the myelin is the insulation, and you're right. So it keeps and maintains those electrical impulses that are happening along the axon, right? So they insulate the axons. Okay, and in MS, what happens? You get malformed myelin. So your myelins are not able to conduct the pulses completely. You're losing some of that electric potential as a result of not having that insulation. So it's not going all the way through. So you'll have a lot of trouble with muscle movements and things like that. So we'll see MS patients that struggle with walkings, and when they have episodes, it's worse than others. And that's because that myelin is depleted or degraded or deformed. Okay. And then so in that case, so MS can be two types. You can have MS as a result of genetic disorder, or you can have MS as a result of an autoimmune disease where myelin is being attacked, and so the myelin that's insulating the nerve cell is being attacked. As a result of that, the nerve cell is being affected directly. Okay. So, the other thing it could be is you could have developmental disorders. Okay, so in the case of developmental disorders, so I'll give you an example of autistic. So they believe that autism is a result of a neurological deficiency, and that is a result of developmental disorders. However, they haven't been able to actually pinpoint exactly what it is that's causing the autistic effect, whether it's a genetic factor or whether it is a environmental factor. But they do notice that autistic children have certain traits that are associated with them when they do the neurological exam. So in the case of the kids that are on the autistic spectrum, they kind of believe that it's that the brain isn't quite wired correctly, and so you don't have the proper connections to the right regions. So that's what they're guessing at, but there isn't a lot of consistent proof, and they're not seeing general trends, through individuals that are on that spectrum. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in other words, that's still up in the air. Okay. The other reason that you can have these effects, so we have due to infections, blunt force trauma, or just cognitive disorders. It's not cognitive, congenital. Okay. Okay, so let's move forward. Come on. Sorry. Okay, let me clear. Okay, so this is Brodmann's cytoarchetype, architectural aspect of the cerebral cortex. And so Brodmann is this German scientist who's actually a neurologist and a histologist. And he basically kind of mapped out the regions of the cerebral cortex and kind of pinpoint what region was associated with various things. Okay, so you found that like in region 1, 2, and 3, so those are all related to somatic sensations, so like touch, vibration, pain, temperature reception, proprioception, and then also concepts of just sensory, like the feelings that you have in your legs, your arms, and stuff like that. So the sensory homunculus, which, if I remember correctly, means like little man. So you guys remember the fake picture with the portion of the cerebral of the cerebral cortex with the leg on it and the arm and all of that stuff. And I showed it a couple of slides back. So in that case, so that area 1 is going to be dealing with that. So you can kind of see it all labeled here. So let me kind of expand a little bit further. So he basically mapped out the cerebral cortex to 50 different regions, and based upon his studies and other studies, he mapped out what type of functions are happening where. Okay, and so in areas, let's say 1, 2, and 3, like I said, we're going to be our sensory, and then in areas 4, it's going to be our primary motor cortex, area 6 is going to be our premotor cortex. Okay. Down here in area 22, that's going to be our primary auditorial cortex. So, you know, things associated with hearing. And then we have like area 17, that's going to be the visual. Okay. Now, the areas around it, like area 18 here, I know you can't see it, but this is actually area 18, area 18. Okay, so area 18 and area 19 are going to be involved in processing. So even within those areas, you have part of the area that's going to be responsible for that primary sensory aspect of things. And then you're going to have an area that's adjacent to it that's going to be responsible for processing. And so he kind of noticed this throughout that entire region, because like earlier I was talking to you about area 4, which is the primary motor cortex. And then area 6 is going to be the premotor cortex. So the areas are, as I said, aligned next to each other so that they kind of, you have an area that's kind of dedicated to certain aspects of sensory or motory or things like that. Okay. So let's see. So initially, they used to just define it by the different areas. So area 1, 2, 3. So then we've gotten a little more elaborate. And so, as I said, you have these areas that are going to be adjacent to each other. So there's going to be three types of processing regions. You have your first processing region is your primary processing. So we have the primary motor cortex. Then we have what we call the association region. So we have a motor association region. So that would be that area 6. That was that premotor type of situation. And then we have what we call the integration. And integration is multi-modulated regions. And so it'll use aspects of that primary and then also of the association. And so it's able to do multiple modalities. So multiple functions in that region. Okay. And so again, the cerebral cortex is kind of organized in that fashion with those regions, and those regions that are going to be surrounding them that have those roles. Okay. So, for instance, if we talk about like memory, right? So memory is going to be located in can't get the exact region, but so it's actually going to be located in areas 1, 2, 4, and 17 and 22. If we go back, so we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so aspects of memory are going to be located within these regions, and but memory storage is going to be located adjacent to that. So memory storage is going to be in that the adjacent region to that 1, 3, and 4 region. So that primary region. Okay, so okay. So if we start talking about memory, so there's this an example in your book where they talked about this guy named Henry Bolson, and basically Henry had issues with epilepsy, and so they actually did a bilateral lobectomy, and removed like a portion of his frontal, I believe it's frontal cortex, and so yeah, and so as a result of that, he was able to sit there. He wasn't able to form new long-term memories, right? So he was able to get short-term memories. So he could remember what he's done short-term, but he wasn't able to sit there and process things so that he would change that short-term memory to a long-term memory, okay? And so and long-term memories are often called episodic memories. And so the portion of his brain that remained was able to sit there and do that process, but the portions that was removed wasn't able to sit there and go from that transition from that from that short-term memory to the long-term memory. But he could remember events that happened prior to the lobectomy. Okay, so it wasn't the fact that he wasn't able to store them, or they weren't able to exist, but it was just the fact that he wasn't able to make new ones. Okay, and so that kind of helps us kind of understand this concept of those neurological exams, to sit there and try to understand what aspects are being affected, and not all regions are being stimulated or being utilized for all aspects. Okay. Okay, so another example is speech. So speech can kind of be broken up into two areas. And so we have the Broca area. The Broca area is going to be responsible for speech production. So just the concept of being able to speak. And then we have the Wernicke area, and that's going to be it's going to be basically understanding of speech, or let's see. So Broca is responsible for the production, and the Wernicke is responsible for like the understanding, or the receptive aspect of speech. Okay, so now during development, this white matter, the white matter that goes between the Broca and the Wernicke area is so it's first very generalized, and then it gets more formulated. So there's still this connection between both aspects of the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe. Okay, so, and that connection runs, as I said, runs through that area from the Wernicke to the Broca area. And aspects of this, if you have injury as a result of that, that could actually affect as both situations, that formation of speech, as well as the understanding of speech, where in the case of a deficiency in this area could result in not being able to speak. So children that often have issues with learning to speak or are delayed in learning to speak often have effects that are affecting the bronchial area, and where children that have issues with understanding speech have issues with the Wernicke area. Okay. Questions, concerns?
No.
Cash?
So if you get sick and one of those two is being affected, it could cause just the specific one that's being affected to affect your language, or when it comes to
That's
speaking.
right. Yeah. Yeah. So if the first region is being affected, you may go from a kid that normally spoke well, and then as a result of the infection and everything that causes damage to the bronchial area, then that kid won't speak, you know? And so, and then in the case of the Wernicke area, say that was affected, then that kid would have issues with understanding speech. Okay.
It's
And
only
then,
gonna area. It's not gonna affect. It's only gonna affect one area, or could affect two areas at the same time.
so typically when it affects two areas, so because these guys are connected through this region here,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when it's affecting both areas where they can't speak and they can't understand this and can't understand speech, then it probably means that it's somewhere along the conduction route that is happening, because this is where those pulses are being translated. So your speech and your conductive to understanding speech are kind of connected together. So you must have something that is happening somewhere in that conductive route. So that they're tied together in ways, right?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, so
So if a child had a trauma event, is this part of why they may not be speaking at the time?
yes, if they could have a head injury, or it could be like a general trauma event. Yeah, that's true. And there have been cases where like a kid had fallen down on the playground and hit their head, and as a result of that, they weren't speaking. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so when we talk about the mental status exam is just to be testing the functions that are going to be attributed to like attention, memory, speech, language, sensation, judgment, and abstract reasoning. Okay. And so you guys remember when we talked about the guy that had the spike that went through his head? Gage, I believe is his name. So in his case, right? Remember they had talked, before he was a good, hardworking, honest man and all of that. And then he went from that to being really lazy, mean and all of that. So that is an example of, somebody who, like, initially when they had done a test, you know, the individual seems fine, you know, before the traumatic event, and then after the event, after the damage occurred to his cortex, he's now, you know, his mood has changed, you know, so it's also associated with our mood, and that has to deal with our judgment and our abstract, our abstract reasoning, you know. Now he's a womanizer and he drinks all the time, doesn't want to work, you know, so it plays in that route. So I guess personality is the word that I'm looking for. That's the other one. Personality. Okay. So the next part is so the cranial nerve. So the cranial nerve, you know, so you have your 12 cranial nerves, and nerve one is the olfactory. So there's basically a smell test that's going to be associated with it. So they're going to, you know, various smells. So you're going to smell coffee, you're going to smell mint. You're going to determine whether or not your nose is able to pick up those different scents. Excuse me. And so again, you could have a result loss of smell. So for instance, coronavirus, right? That would be an infection. So here we have coronavirus that's affecting our sense of smell. So is it a direct effect? Is it affecting, you know, some of the receptors that are found up in the nerves, in the nose itself, or is it a cranial effect?
I think it's just the nose itself.
Well, you would think that, right? But it's also known that coronavirus also causes clotting, right? So it could be a result of a stroke event. Stroke patients often have issues with no longer having a sense of smell, right? So they struggle with smell as well as maybe paralysis, and so, or speech. So it has the potential of affecting, it could have multiple targets. It could be right there at the receptor aspect of things, or it could be within the cranial component as well too. Okay, are you with me so far?
Yes.
Okay, so, and you know, this virus is sort of interesting because remember we talked about that calcium, the calcium homeostasis?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's also known that the levels of calcium is dramatically affected by the virus, by infection. And so, if I remember correctly, if you have an increase in calcium, you end up getting clotting. If you have a decrease in calcium, you don't. Okay, and so somehow the virus is also thought to be affecting that clotting aspect, and it has something to do specifically with the gradient, the calcium gradient in your system. And so it's thought to have some effect on channels that are your ion channels as well. And so some of the early treatments that they had were blockers of certain ion channels. And some of them showed some progress and some of them didn't.
So
Homicide. What was that?
So this virus is affecting your homeostasis in your body, which is one of them is calcium.
That's right. So it's affecting our calcium homeostasis. It's also, we know that it also has an effect on our, you know, one of the things that they say happens when you're infected with the virus, you lose that sense of smell, right? So the question is it a temporary effect or is it a permanent effect? Is it causing that stroke or a stroke in a certain region that is affecting that aspect?
Well, I guess it depends on the person, because some of them say that they get their taste and smell back.
Yeah.
But others say that they still can't taste or smell, or certain things taste and smell differently, and they can't stand it anymore. Something they used to love or like, and then they just can't anymore.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so this is the Snail chart. So you guys probably are always done this. If you guys cover one eye, cover the other eye, read the bottom line, read line 10, right? You guys have done that?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 So we do it when we go for our driving test. We do it for when we're checking out to see whether or not we need glasses, right? Okay, so one of your cranial nerves is your optic nerve. That's your cranial nerve, your second cranial nerve. And so we know that effects of that cranial nerve could affect aspects of our periphery, so our peripheral vision. It could affect depth perception, and so depending on where that neurological effect is happening, we can get an idea of where that damage is occurring. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so part of the test is a visual test, right? So it's kind of going to be able to test our depth perception, our field of view, and also other aspects. Okay, so we often will test. We'll test. So we'll also test our balance, and so, or our equilibrium, and our auditory senses as well. And so when we do those tests, there's a test called the Rhine Test, which is basically uses a tuning fork, where you guys know what a tuning fork is. You hit it and it goes, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we kind of use the Rhine Test to sit there and get an aspect of our balance, and then also our auditory as well. And so here is an example of another way that we could sit there and be affected. So this here is basically a normal pituitary gland, and this here is a pituitary tumor, right? So the gland is malignant, right? So in this case, it's growing consistently, and it's putting pressure on the optic nerve, right? And as a result of it putting pressure on the optic nerve, then we're not able to sit there and see. And so, normal, we'd have normal vision in one case, and then in this patient, they actually noticed that this person had what they call tunnel vision, So, meaning that the only thing that they could really focus on is what is directly in front of them. So they weren't able to see the periphery. Okay. And so a lot of times, we could have aspects of tumors having an effect on different things. Okay. So okay, psychiatric eye movement is just basically that rapid eye movement that we do, like when we get some type of visual stimuli, bug flying near you or something like that. You start blinking very fast, or your eyes start moving really fast. And so that's also one of the things that are going to be tested. And so it's often be stimulated with a light or with some type of stimulus to sit there and see whether or not your eye is moving rapid or it isn't moving rapid enough. So we have the Vastubu ocular reflex. And so this basically is the reflex where if we move our head, our eyes will counter. You guys remember we talked about that when we were talking about the optical nerves earlier?
Yes.
Wasn't expecting to take as long as it is. Okay, so we also have the motor nerves in the neck. So in the case of the motor nerves in the neck, so again, we're looking at those 12 cranial nerves. And so they'll have you do various tests as, rotate your shoulders, right? Extend your neck up, extend your neck back. Sit there and determine whether or not your accessory nerves are able to control the muscles that they're supposed to be controlled by, okay? Okay, so when we think about the cranial nerves, there are going to be four major groups that are going to be associated with it. First one is going to be your sensory nerves. Your second one is going to be your nerves that control like your eye movement. Your third one is going to be your oral cavity and your pharynx, and then and the fourth one is going to be nerves that control your neck. Okay, so those are going to be the ones that they're going to be looking at primarily during the testing of your cranial nerves. Okay, so this here is the localization of your spinal fiber tract. So during development, we have, or say, we look at our spinal column. So we have the sensory nerve that are going to be dorsal, and we have our motor nerves that are going to be ventral. Okay, so and that happens during development, so it happens naturally. So when we're doing our sensory and motor exam, we're often sitting there looking at the effects of the various parts of our body or regions of our body that are known as dermatomes. And so like regions of our skin that sit there that'll be affected and being able to pick up those sensations. So typically what they'll do is they'll take a cotton swab and they'll kind of like tickle you in areas, kind of like brush you lightly in certain areas to see whether or not you have any there. Okay, so then that'll let us know that, if you have that touch, aspect of sensory. And then they'll take that same cotton swab, they'll break it, and then they'll like run it across your skin to see whether or not you feel that scraping or that pain. Okay, so then it'll test that pain sensation. Okay, and so this is happening, through all the sensory parts of your skin. So typically when they're doing this type of test, they do it from top to bottom. Excuse me. And so again, we have another scientists that basically have broken up the body in various regions and located to sit there and let us know which sensory, which regions are being regulated by various sensory receptors. Okay. So there's one other test. And so, of course, in terms of motor tests, we're going to be doing, or our motor exam, we're going to be doing a lot of flexing. They're also going to examine the muscles themselves. And so they're going to be looking for atrophy, hypertonicity, and flatity. Okay, so, or basically, let me put it in English. So they're going to be looking for muscle tone. So there are regions like if you're having issues with motor functions, you're going to go through, right? So you're going to get your muscles are going to start being reduced because those cells are probably behind, they're not get to them, or they're not being stimulated in a way. And as a result of that, you're going to have lack of muscle tone in certain regions. They're also going to test your reflexes. So you're going to be look at your deep tendon reflexes, which is just like and so they're going to have you do various stretches to see whether or not you're able to bend. Do you guys know the knee jerk where they hit your knee and then you kick?
Yes.
Okay, so that's an example of the deep tendon reflex. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to be basically looking at is coordination and gait. So, oops. So the cerebellum is responsible for our coordination, and so this is just so this is just basically showing you the three peduncles, the three peduncles. So you have your superiors, you have your inferior, and you have your medial or your medium regions. And so, and they're all going to be kind of close together. They all have various functions that are going to be associated with it. And so these regions are going to be, let's see, so your middle cerebral peduncle, it's gonna connect your cerebellum to your brainstem. Your superior is going to be connecting, is going to be connecting your cerebellum to your midbrain and your forebrain. And then your inferior is going to be connecting to your medulla. And these guys are going to be kind of like, so they're just fibers, and they're going to act like a bridge. Okay, so and bridge, and so they're just fibers. They're fibers of axons that are transmitting the signal. So let's see. The inferior it's also called the inferior olive because of the color it is, color that's associated with it. It has like an olive color to it. So the majority of this is a combination of white matter and white brain matter. And the olive fibers, or the inferior olive, have that as it represents the fibers that are going to be inputting to the cerebellum, and then also partially from the spinal cerebellum tract, where the middle cerebellar pinnacle, or this guy is going to be it's going to be part of the cortical pontine cerebellar pathway, and that's going to be connecting the cerebral cortex with the cerebellum. And then the superior, which is going to be like the major output of the cerebellum, is going to be divided into what they call the red nucleus in the midbrain and the thalamus. And then it's going to return processing to the motor cortex. So, sorry. Come on. Okay. Okay, so these are the major regions of the cerebellum. So we have the midline and the hemisphere. So in the okay, so the part that kind of controls our gait, and that's also going to be responsible for our basically it's going to be involved in our equilibrium, our proprioceptive feedback, and coordination movements, is going to be the vermis, and then also the floccular lobe. Floccular lobe. Sorry about the mispronunciation. Okay, so as I said earlier, when we talk about gait, that's just our walk. And so our balance is going to be kind of be dependent on these two aspects. And then the red nucleus is going to basically send out an output as a response to what was actually being entered in. So, and so often when we do our testing for coordination, it kind of gives us an idea of what aspects of the performance can be affected. Because we also have like visual information that's also going to be processed there as well. And so if we kind of divvy up the regions, and depending on the test that we do, we can sit there and determine whether it'll be the spinal cerebellum that's going to be affected, or is it going to be the vestibular cerebellum, or the cerebral cerebellum. Okay. So if you have a case of ataxia is a movement disorder. That's a result of a disorder of an effect in the cerebellum. And so in the case of ataxia, you kind of lose your voluntary movement. So for instance, some of the individuals that have MS, muscular sclerosis, will have issues with their coordination or their gait. So I had a coworker when I was in grad school, and she was diagnosed with MS when she was in her teens. I think she was like 15 or 16. And she was at that point, she was probably like 34. And when she walked, she would often have to have somebody close by because she would lose her balance so easily, so readily, because of the MS. And so that polarization isn't happening the way it should because you have that myelin defect going on. Another way is that often how many of you guys have been drunk?
I have.
You have?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you raise your hand, Jesse?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. So have you been so drunk where you couldn't walk?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or have you guys seen the movies where they're doing the test where you touch your nose and then you... So why do you think they do that?
To see if you have balance.
If you have balance, yeah. So they're testing ataxia, right? To see if you have a movement disorder, right? Because alcohol impairs your cerebellum, and specifically a lot of alcohol content will actually impair your cerebellum. Okay, and so as a result of that, you'll end up, stumbling or falling. Or I remember I got so drunk I fell into the wishing wells, those little fountains or wishing fountains where you throw coins into.
Yeah.
I was in Vegas and can't remember which casino it was, but they have a really big one up front. I was so messed up. I fell in there and I also vomited in the wishing well. It was not pretty. Not pretty at all. Okay.
So it affects some people, but I know that there's some people where they seem like they're not drunk. Like they seem more, I guess, more balanced than when they're drunk than when they're not.
Yeah. When they're drunk. A lot of those people are called alcoholics. And their body, so their body is compensating. So a lot of times people do go up with it. There's a enzyme in your body called alcohol dehydrogenase. It'll actually break down the alcohol. So So it's known that typically Asians are deficient or they have a defective form of alcohol dehydrogenase. So they typically get drunk very, very fast and take a lot less to get drunk. Where other people, their body adjusts and they make a lot more of that alcohol dehydrogenase and it breaks down. So it takes a lot more for them to get drunk. And so they become heavy drinkers. And so somebody who's drinking consistently, what happens, it upregulates that alcohol dehydrogenase and it causes problems later on. Yeah. But you're right. There are distinctions. And then we also, we just have those natural biological differences. Like I said, alcohol dehydrogenase being one of them. The other one, like some of us absorb alcohol better than others. So that also plays a part. Okay, so we're going to start chapter 17 on Monday. I need to put up your lab for today. So if you guys give me a minute to throw it up. How are your fish doing? Are they surviving?
Magically, they are surviving after one of them tried to commit suicide.
Okay. We'll see how they do today then. So today is the test. Up to you. But we'll meet you in the lab site, because I figure there'll be a few people, maybe.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll see you guys there in a few minutes.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good.